Welcome to a tutorial where we will be painting a very interesting subject, in my opinion. So this is one of the oldest tree in my hometown. I think this is supposed to be over 800 years old, and it's quite an interesting composition. I feel this is a huge tree, and the branches are going all over the place. So the composition wise, it will be very interesting and probably also quite challenging. But my main focus is going to be the play between light and shadows of the branches and the tree here, without doing too many details, and keeping it still fresh and loose. So the brushes I will be using, I'm using a different brush than usual. So today I'm using, this is kind of the Chinese calligraphy brush, and this is a synthetic mix brush, and a very long and thin brush as well for thinner branches. My intention is to use a limited palette, so ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and azo yellow, maybe some cobalt turquoise as well, where I feel like this green needs to pop a little bit more and make it a bit more interesting. So what I'm going to focus on is the tree. So I'm going to start with painting each branch here. So I expect this to take a little while, so I'll just get started. So for the tree, I expect to make use quite neutral colors, very warm colors of the tree where the sun is hitting it. So I'm using burnt sienna as the foundation. I usually start from the upper left side, almost like reading a book. I find that is an easy way for me to paint. Now I haven't made the sketch completely perfect because I want to have the freedom to kind of go along with the flow a bit. So I'm allowing myself to have some freedom here. So I'm going to be doing a lot of mixing as well. And I'm going to mix up using ultramarine blue, azo yellow. I'm going to have quite a brighter green color as well. And I'm going to add that immediately to the places where I see in the reference photo, where there is quite a lot of this green moss sitting on the branches. So I will also do the places where I feel where there's a lot of shadows going on and I want to have more soft shadows. I can also go in with some ultramarine blue where I feel that it's where it allows me to just immediately paint in the shadows as well. So I'm just going to go down here and paint this. I'm gonna have it a bit darker, so it's good that it mixes up the pigments. I'm gonna have it a bit mixed colors, so I'm just starting to mix some of these different pigments, also give it a bit of shape at the same time, making it a bit more darker brown. So when we paint, we want to have it a bit more pigment in it as well. We don't want it to be too pale. Obviously here it's going to be in the light, but where it's not directly in the light, I want to have it a bit more pigment loaded into it. So I'm just trying to add the pigment for the darker areas of the branch, so to speak. Now hopefully this will be quite easy to make, but I mean, as always with watercolor, there will be surprises and there will be challenges along the way, which I fully expect, of course. I'm just gonna add more azo yellow to this, kind of make some parts here, or just make these bit more hit by the light here. Also lifting off some of the pigments where the light is hitting the branch. So this is also going to be, a lot of it's going to come down to timing as well. It's very important to time the different washes. Once this is dried a bit more, I am going to try to go in with some pure ultramarine blue where the shadows are, and I'm going to try to not have too much water on it. So I'm going to use more pigment in order to get these softer shadows. Can use even more pigment here. So this is where is going to be where the light hits, branches and leaves, and well, there's not a lot of leaves in this particular picture, but where the light goes in and goes through the branches. So my intention is to make quite dark shadows immediately, where I see I can make some really nice soft shadows. So I'm using ultramarine blue because we get a very nice sort of cool color. This doesn't have to be exact where the shadows are in the reference photo, of course. It's going to be very hard to try to match the reference photo when there's so much going on with details and so on. We're just sort of getting an overall foundation to it. There's going to be a mix between the hard shadows and softer shadows. Wet in wet, and I can add some more, adding some more strong green pigment as well. Let that intermingle while it's still wet. Also letting the white paper come through at some areas. So now I'm going to move to the second branch. Have this sort of warm foundation as well. This is going to be largely covered in shadow, this branch. So we're just going to move down fairly quickly here. If there's some blooming, I don't mind it too much if there's some blooming here and there as well. I think that could actually add to the final result, because it becomes part of the rough surface of the branches. So I think that can actually be quite beneficial, hopefully. there we have the warm side here. I'm actually going to use a bigger brush here. I'm going to go in with a bit darker. There's not so much green on this tree here, so I'm just going to give it some initial shade or a shadow. I'm gonna look for the parts where there are some clear green moss areas. You can see some here. Have some there. I usually also, of course, squint my eyes. I can mix in some cobalt turquoise. That can be quite interesting, perhaps. So as I said before, this branch is going to be largely covered. I go in with a lot more pigments and less water. While this is drying now, I want to add in these shadows now while it's drying to get these kind of softer edges, softer shadows I mean. Can add some variations of dark burnt sienna. And I can add some burnt sienna on the border where the dark blue, the ultramarine, is the shadow, of course, and some areas here is going to be almost black. At least that's what it looks like in the photograph, but I do not want to have so many black actual shadows. So I never use black basically in my paintings, because I feel like I can use black in some paintings where there's more like a grayer days and so on. In this case, it's a lot of sunlight, so I'm not going to use too many blacks. I'm going to try to make it a bit more vivid. I'm also thinking about introducing a red color, but I still do want to keep it the way I intended to from the beginning. With the burnt sienna is a sort of course, a redder color almost. But I feel like a red color would be nice to kind of complement the blues and the shadows. To make the blue have a complementary color beside it, so it starts vibrating, and you could really make the color pop a lot more. But I would say that it's actually almost too late to introduce that now, because I would want to have that in my initial washes. I think that's pretty good for now. I'm gonna move out to this other branch. I'm gonna use the same brush, keep going, just giving this a bit more the burnt sienna. I'm going to try not to just jump over this large tree branch here. I'm going to go over that later on. Oops, that's a lot of pigment, but that's fine. It can be good to have a bit more pigments at times as well. So So I want to get this very warm shade here. Adding some white pigments as well. Adding some greens as well. Maybe putting some azo yellow, see what happens. Maybe that's a bit too bright. I think that probably works pretty well. So I'm going to use the thinner brush because there's not too many shadow areas here. So I can use a thinner brush using ultramarine blue, taking off some of the water. Oops, I need a bit more. Used to be darker. Then going in to paint the shadow of this branch tree here. Once again, I can use some even darker ones. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue makes a very dark, nice color. It can become very, very dark, almost black, which can be very useful. We have a large shadow part here from where this tree is casting a shadow. Okay, see here, and before this dries up, I'm gonna have some more. Almost gives it a bit of shape here as well. But this tree is very lit up by the sun, so I do want to have a nice contrast here between the shadows, the darkest and the lightest parts, to give it that very nice contrast. That also makes it stand out a lot more. Then you can look at the tree bark and you can see some, you can remove some pigment, and you can try to squint your eyes and kind of make some softer brush strokes here to give it kind of the texture of the bark at the same time. But I will go over that in the end, so I shouldn't have to do that too much now. Now I just want to focus on getting in the color of the tree here. So that is drying up now, so I'm actually going to do this tree, and if it starts blooming, I don't mind it too much. I'm just gonna go over this one now. I'm gonna try to avoid that other tree there. This, and then it goes on to this. It comes up. Oh, yeah, it actually goes behind that tree. So it kind of wraps around this tree. I actually haven't thought about that until now. We'll see when that goes away. Try to add a bit more water here so it stays wet for a bit longer. We have a lot of like thinner branches here. I have to be quite quick to add in my shadows. Let's see, there's not too much green, maybe some here. I can just make up some mossy parts of the tree. Maybe, let's see, there's some here. It doesn't have to be exact, of course. Remove the water and go in with the shadows here. Need some more. Squint my eyes to see where So this is going to be almost blending into this tree. They're going to have the same shadow basically. Oops. Oh, that's kind of nice. A happy accident, as you call it. Becomes very, very concentrated there, but I think that looks kind of nice. Be careful to not overdo the shadows. I want it to be very lit up by the sun here. Once again, I have to squint my eyes a bit to see where the smaller shadows it comes from. I'm gonna mix up use some random strokes, brush strokes here to kind of soften this and make, because there's so many tiny little shadows and stuff here that comes from other branches. But at the same time, I don't want too much focus on these. This is the thing that I was a bit worried about, not having time before it dries. I don't want to have them too harsh, these shadows here. I'm gonna go over this huge tree trunk here. Once again, moving with the warmest color. Oh, that's a very rich color. I'm gonna try to avoid the greener parts a little bit because I want to have a bit more concentrated green color in these areas here. Same goes for this trunk. I'm gonna try to because there's a lot more green on this trunk here. So now I'm going to try to mix in these quite bright areas here. I'm just going to remove some pigment. It's a bit too dark. I think that's a nice color. I'm just making this very light green. I think that's a nice color. Kind of gives it this very bright and lively, vivid green. But this also, of course, has a lot of shadows, this big branch. So we have to go over that. The ultramarine blue. Squint my eyes a bit. I want to have it a bit more. So that goes there. Softens up a bit. Still has a lot of very, very dark shadows as well. I'm actually going to mix this with some burnt sienna to make this almost like a black color. So I want this to almost, my goal is to almost make this sing. That's what I like to say. I want to make the colors sing and vibrate as much as possible. That's what the beauty for me is with watercolor, is to make it very vivid. I think that's pretty good. You can give it some irregularities here to kind of give it a sense of bark catching the lights and the shadows. Maybe that's a bit... I don't want too much contrast here on the edge of the paint picture. I'm gonna add some more rough shape, rough texture here. And then you have to be a bit careful when you watch it, of course, to see how it dries up. I'm just looking and watching the reference image to see if it looks like it matches. See where I can put some more interesting bits of color in. I can add some cobalt turquoise here as well to make it a bit more interesting, kind of give it a bit more, make it vibrate a bit more. So now I'm going to try to finish up this front part here. Then I'm going to work my way back. And I'm going to keep the colors here in the foreground warmer. I see I have forgotten a part here, and that's actually part of the branch and the tree here. We try to connect everything here. So this is a large grave, actually. This is a graveyard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like I did with the trees. I'm going to mix in a... So this is a very like warm and tree. I'm sorry, not a tree. It's stone, large stone with a lot of texture, and I'm going to try to mimic that texture in my first wash. Keep it a bit different in the coloration from the trees, so it doesn't look like a tree, the pigment of the tree. So I can actually mix in some different grayer pigments here, just so you don't read it in as part of the tree, which is obviously not. Also leave in some wider areas here for to make it, because there will be a lot of sun hitting this. I'm just going to paint in this, and I'm going to try to paint in some shadows here, some cast shadows from these huge branches that is going to cover all of this. Now this is quite challenging. I have to be a bit mindful of how much this has dried. So before that, I'm actually going to try to do some wet in wet work and try to make some shadows that is part of the rock, or the stonework, basically. Try to define the stonework a bit. Just make some colors here. Have some greens. There's a... Give it some shape here. I obviously don't want this to be in focus. I can also go over this in the end with some dry brush to give it some texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to once again go over with the ultramarine blue. Dry off some of the water. Basically just pull it like this. Hopefully I can kind of mimic this softer shadows, or the play between the light and shadow that goes on here. So the lighter parts, where the highlight and the sun is striking it. And let's see here. Try to soften the parts where I want to be a bit more soft. I can also, once again, go in with some turquoise blue, maybe, just to add some interest. Add some pure burnt sienna to kind of give it some, make it a bit more interesting in the shadow. Basically where I want the viewer to be looking. I think that will be enough for now. So I'm gonna go over this part here where the ground is. Do not want to make this too much in focus. I'm gonna probably do a bit of a very light ground layer here. Add a bit more green here as well, so it looks like it's spring, kind of spring grass coming up under here. And I'm not too worried about the white areas. I actually want some of the white parts here. Gives it a nice crisp look. Once again, I have to go over this with a quite big and dark shape here with ultramarine blue. Hopefully this will look all right. This goes on the ground. Get some nice play there with the light as well. There's some nice contrast. You can go in a bit to the tree as well. This almost becomes part of the texture of the tree. You want to connect the shadow a bit more. I think it sits pretty well there. See, that's kind of a bit too much. Looks a bit too much. Doesn't. Yeah, we have to kind of separate this ground area from the trees a bit more. So there's some tree here as well. I'm just gonna go over this very roughly. Also part of the tree stump here. Just gonna mix in some different colors. And some, of course, very dark, wet and wet here. It kind of looks That's pretty good. I'll connect this shadow a bit more. It should actually be a lot darker. Now when it's dried, I can see where it needs to be darker, and I can go over this even more and kind of improve the shadows a bit more. I'm gonna do this tree, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix in a bit of ultramarine blue into this brown, because I don't want it to be as warm in its tint as the tree here in the foreground. So I still want it to be brown and a bit warmer, but I want it to be less warm than these in the foreground. I'm not going to do these too complex and too much details here. That's not where I want the viewer to be looking, basically. I'm gonna add just some simple, bit more paler shadows here. Once again, I don't want too much contrast to be in the area here in the back. Don't want too much focus going in on these branches here, generally speaking. But I still want it to be, a bit more busy, of course, because there are a lot of things happening here with the branches and whatnot. I can also do that in the end. Add some more branches and stuff. Just gonna do this other tree here. Using the burnt sienna once again. I'm not looking at the reference photo, I'm basically just letting the brush go wherever it wants. And once again, adding some shadows here. Kind of toning down the warmth of it as well at the same time. So gonna let this tree go down here as well. Let's see, what other tree do I have left? I have some trees here and here. Can make some tree. I don't want this to be, I can actually do it here so the highlight area contrasts with the shadow area of this tree. Just really do not want the eyes to wander too much into these trees here in the back. And what I do then is just simply giving them less pigment so they don't stand out as much. These are, a lot paler than everything in the foreground. I still want them to show, I still want them to be part of the picture, but I'm also going to add the sky and even more background later. So that is also going to help improve the depth of the painting. There we have those trees. Now we have basically have the background, which is going to be trees in the background. It's going to be there's going to be a mix between warm and pale and cold colors, cooler colors, so it moves backward. Probably going to have a lot of washed out blues. I have some rocks here as well that I want to continue on. I'm going back now to, I'm basically just giving these sort of like not a tree color. I'm just wetting these down. I'm gonna try to make these, just kind of part of this area here. Do not want to pull too much attention to them. Obviously I want to give them a lot more shadows so they kind of connect and they look like they stand in front of this tree at least. So you have to wait a little bit of time here. You have, so I'm just going to try to pull some ultramarine blue here. Once again, I squint my eyes a little bit and watch. Okay, don't want to pull too much attention here as well. I want to have just kind of define and give these part of the, give them these some shadows as well. So that's pretty good there. It's not getting too much attention. I also want to add some, there are some stones and stuff here as well. Kind of want the viewer or the eye to wander in a bit more to the picture. I also wanted some nice highlights, leave some nice highlights here. This is going to be gravestone. I want this to be kind of here lit up by the sun. Maybe add some mesa yellow. Give that sort of like a different look. Maybe not yellow, it was a great choice. Just make it a bit more brown. Lift off some color. I don't like that yellow actually. This is going to pale out a lot more as well. Same for these grave stones here in the background. Can be a bit different types of rocks, so it's like different shades of stone. So when I leave some white spots here as well, it's going to make it feel, and when I put the ground in, it's going to make it feel like there's a lot of highlights and nice highlights here that kind of will make everything pop and make it look like a very bright day. So I'm going to have to be very cautious of not over-painting the background too much. So I'm just putting in some colors where I think would be very beneficial for the end result. You have some rocks here. I don't know if they're 100% necessary to make, but there are some rocks here in the background that I think I want to have. I probably shouldn't do make them too dark so soon. So now, once again, I'm just trying to like make some interesting shapes and background here where I show that there is something without showing too much. I think that's a critical part of this. And obviously letting the light and the white of the paper also show through. Here's another tree here. So So this will all be like very suggestive. So there will be a shadow here in the background as well. Kind of making some shadows and things that, so you can see that there are shadows and light in the background as well. And that's a very fine balance. Of course, okay, I'm just gonna finish up here, the tree in the background. I'm just gonna leave it there. I don't want to put too much emphasis on it. I'm just gonna let this dry for a moment, and then I'm going to figure out how to paint what I'm gonna paint next. So I'm going to paint the sky now, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use some erythrithium blue and mix it with some ultramarine blue. Erythrithium blue is, no, sorry, this is cerulean blue. So cerulean blue is a very nice sky color in my opinion. It's a bit brighter, and I'm just gonna paint around the branches as much as possible. And obviously I'm gonna paint more branches later, so I want to keep a pretty good pool of paint here that I can go back to, and I want to keep this sky color quite pale, not too much pigment really. So what I hope to get is some nice highlights on the branches, on the thicker branches. And I also hope that, you know, everything will pop out a bit more the way I intended it to from the beginning. So I have to obviously be a bit careful, not super cautious, because this is still a loose and nice watercolor. So I'm just trying to paint around the branches as much as possible. And if it goes into the branches every here and there, it doesn't really matter. Mix up some more. Should actually have mixed up even more to get this concentrated color. And that's very nice. That's a nice complementary color to that yellow there, I think. The good thing about having branches is that you can stop at some branches and then you can keep on going. So it gives you kind of a break. As long as you don't stop too much in the middle of the sky, which I tend to do. Let's see, I just go down here, and I have to be a bit wary about where the tree line is going to come. So this is actually too much ultramarine blue I can see here. What I can do is I can actually lift off some of the paint here, because I want the tree line to come in somewhere around here. I want it to become a bit more pale. So I can actually try to kind of fade down a bit. Make it even paler when it gets closer to the ground. As long as I have nice blue color here in the higher area here closer to the sky. Generally speaking, the sky usually is like a gradient, so it becomes darker the higher up you go. So once again, the tree line is going to be somewhere around here, so I shouldn't focus too much on that. I should actually leave the tree line there. Can I just make it a bit lighter down here? So I'm going to have some nice blue here, kind of contrast with the tree. Have some more ultramarine blue here as well. Gets to the edge here. Kind of get a gradient from a darker sky to a brighter one. And generally, I tend to kind of just do not want to leave too many lights on the edges and the upper corners. I want the eyes to wander into the subject matter. Just gonna go down here. Should be finished here soon with that, and I'm gonna have to then do the tree line as well. Fade out this a bit. So now we're going to do the tree line and some more work on the ground and some branches and so on. Okay, so some time has passed now. This is completely dry, and what we're going to do is we're going to paint in the branches, and there's a lot of things going on in the background, but I want to keep it as simple as possible, so I'm just going to fill in some branches here, give it some mid-tone value, because we see the branch that I have here has a lot of highlights. So I'm going to dark some of these branches and also make some new branches. I want to keep the branches a bit mid-tone in value, so I'm just going to mix up a mix between ultramarine blue, so I don't want to make it just too dark, and burnt sienna, maybe Ellison crimson as well. These are a bit more reddish in its color because the lighting is hitting it, and maybe not. I'm going to have a bit more yellow tint, so I'm probably going to go with Ellison crimson, and okay, that's a good one. That's a nice warm brown color. I'm just going to make some more branches here in the background. These are going to be some very random branches that goes down over here. Kind of just covers up. And then I can then go in and I can soften them a bit. I'm going to have a very random pattern basically. Add some burnt sienna here. Just going to fill in some more thinner branches as well. And I want to spray it down a little bit because I want these to be kind of softened up. I don't want them to be too sharp in their shape. Gotta be careful to not spray it down too much. But I want to have some variation in tone and in hue, so on. So get some really like random variation. I think that's good now. I'm going to let this dry up a little bit. Or what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do this background trees here. I want to have a blue, quite a mid to light layer of blue here. Probably make it a bit more warmer tone. I can do a mix between a warmer sort of burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue. I can add some more burnt sienna as well. Kind of intermingle that into the background. Try to soften up so I don't make it too obvious where the ground is. Kind of like blend this into the ground, to the background. You can just try to soften the edges a bit as well. You can add some tree, add some ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Kind of make some. Okay, that's a bit dark. And a bit lighter here. Something that reminds or looks like trees or branches and stuff like that. Just making some random shapes there. Actually add a bit more missing crimson to give us some, oops, that's a bit much. Just soften that a bit. Get some reddish tones here. Go with that in the end as well. Finish that off later. Just keep on going here. The background comes back here. Careful to not go into the tree trunk. I'm going to use a bit more burnt sienna as we get closer to this side. It's a bit much. I'm just going to paint it in like this. There's a larger rock here. Give it some random stuff going on here. So again, we can soften up the edges a bit here. Darken it a bit more, do some random bits and pieces where the tree trunks or whatever could be. So this area gets a bit closer in hue and variation and in tone. So things that are closer are usually a bit warmer as well. Where this area would be colder. what I can do is also add some more warmth here and have these areas look a bit more sunlit. Be quite careful to not put too much attention to the edge here. I kind of want this to just fade away and blend in. I don't want the focus to be on the background. So finding a good balance here between the background and the middle ground. So the things just kind of blends out, fades out here. I can also go in before this all dries up. I can go in and I can make some couple of tree trunks or whatever here as well. Can give some variation as well. Be some trees here in the background. Kind of give it this feeling that it is actually the trees are naked. They don't have leaves yet. Add some more horizontal lines. Horizontal lines are always good to give the illusion of shadows, and also place the subjects, plant them on the ground. So you can always put in horizontal lines to give a variation of the vertical and horizontal lines, of course. So once again, I don't want to put too much attention here on these trees and the gravestones and so on. They are secondary in the image. That's why I'm trying to be quite careful when I place these, so I don't want to put too much strength or contrast into these areas. Once this is dried as well, I will do some more, not leaves, but what do you call it before, like the leaf capsules or whatever. So we get some more texture up here, covering up some of these branches as well. Then just finishing up in a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to draw in these smaller branches or pod capsules or whatever they're called here on the tree. So I'm just going to use burnt sienna. They're quite bright here, so I don't want to put too much attention, once again, too much attention to them, but still give it some texture and also cover up some of the area up here in the sky. Just mix in some, give it some illusion, not of leaves, but so that it looks like there's something going on up in the tree. It doesn't look too naked, basically. Give it some more volume. Coming up a bit up here. Go in and make it a bit darker. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Going a bit darker on some areas to give it some shadows, contrast. Focusing on where I want the eye to wander. Do not overdo it too much, because then your eyes start wandering up here, and that's not really the main goal for this painting. Just kind of give it this grandiosity to show this massive, beautiful tree in the sunlight. So I'm basically just covering up some of these branches that I made earlier. Maybe that's good. I think that's enough. I want to make give it some texture here. So I'm gonna go in some ultramarine blue. Just try to give it a tiny bit of texture to the tree as well. Kind of lead the viewer's eye to the tree. Kind of defining the shape a little bit as well at the same time. Defining the darkest areas a bit more. Not overdoing it. Making a nice contrast between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. Give this gravestone, I'm gonna give this a bit more texture as well. Kind of define the shape of this a bit more. Give this a bit more texture here. I have a very dry brush with pigments now. And I was just finding a balance between not giving it too much texture. That's not really the point. The point is to just give it some structure, basically. Give it some, so you feel what type of material it is, basically. This is the finishing touches, really. Also making the viewer, pulling your eyes to where you want the viewer to watch. So maybe not focusing too much on the ground here, but mainly in this tree and this area here. So can give it a bit more shadow shape here. There's kind of these rocks here that are varying the shape of this a bit. So you see that it's almost like stonework that is this area. Use this longer brush to give it some more pigment, kind of giving it a bit more definition and structure in this branch. So you can see almost that it is what type of tree it is. It's a very fine balance between overdoing it and stopping in the right time. You can also give it a tiny bit of texture here in the background. Yeah, so I think that's it. I think this will be the finished result. I hope you enjoy this process. And this is a way basically to approach this painting. This is not a limited palette I did, but it is a very interesting subject and a lot of different random stuff going on in this. Quite a complex scene, and you can make it even more advanced if you want to, but I try to keep it as simple as possible and try to explain the different elements, and the focus point really being this tree here in the foreground, and using a lot more value and hue here in the main subject focus, which is the tree, of course. This area here, how to work with that, and basically not focusing too much on the details, but the relationship between light and dark. Yeah, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. If there's any questions or advice or suggestions you have for upcoming videos, I will be happy to hear from you. So that will be it for now. I hope you enjoy this, and if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and support me if you are able to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.